Welcome, everyone. We'll just take a minute or two to let everyone come in. Maybe I'll share my screen now. Welcome in, everyone. We will wait about a minute to start. Thank you all for joining us. We're excited for today's webinar. Okay, maybe I'll get started as people continue to trickle in. Hello, everyone. My name is Justin Bullock. I am a co-director of the Docs with Disabilities Initiative. We are very excited for our webinar today, which we've called Learning from Case Studies, Disability Inclusion in Graduate Medical Education. So today you will hear from a number of individuals who are either trainees or faculty involved in disability inclusion and accommodations experiences during training. We have a few slides just to introduce the case studies to you all. Then we will bring on the panelists and have them introduce themselves, and then we have questions. And then we will make sure to save time for audience questions. So please write down your questions, and we'll make space for them. Um, it says again, this is a combination effort between the Docs with Disabilities Initiative and the ACGME. Two individuals who may not talk very much today, but who are deeply instrumental in this work. Morgan Passament from the ACGME and Dr. Lisa Meeks from the Docs with Disabilities Initiative. Those are the two people who really spearheaded this effort. And everything that you see today is a product of the work that they did. So we're deeply appreciative. And we're also thankful to the Josiah Macy Jr. Foundation for supporting financially and otherwise. So I'll start with a brief disclaimer, which is today we'll talk about a disability resource hub. It is a combination of ideas and strategies between the ACGME and Docs with Disabilities. These materials are not intended to be thought of as ACGME best practices. They do not reflect the opinions of the ACGME. And institutions and programs are encouraged to consult their own counsel before implementing any ideas or strategies presented. Um, I want to start with introducing this Disability Resource Hub to you all, if you have not heard of it. Um, the Disability Resource Hub is a resource repository that has a number of things. It has a number of current resources, of current literature review. There are multiple toolkits. There's a transition toolkit and a policy toolkit. And today we'll be talking about the case studies, which are essentially examples of times where accommodations went well with trainees. We intentionally had case studies that involved trainees with a variety of disabilities and a variety of accommodations. Um, if you access the resource hub, you will see that there are a number of different resources. Here, the QR code to the right should take you to that. Um, and just to talk a bit more about the case studies, um, currently the hub, it's still information is constantly being uploaded to the hub. And so we are continuing to add resources as we go. The ultimate goal with each case study will be that every case study will have a video presentation, a Docs with Disabilities podcast episode, and a linked article. So here at the bottom, I just have one example. This is led by Dr. Nalinda Charsenkove, which was published in Academic Pediatrics. And so you will see the cases of people on the panel. Some of them have already been published, and you'll see the articles already online, and others have been accepted or in the process of being published. So Today, there's really two main objectives. One, to hear directly from trainees and faculty who shared successful examples of accommodations in GME. And two, to give an opportunity for you to ask your own questions to the panelists. We have a very esteemed set of individuals. I will have them each introduce themselves, but we have Dr. Emily Green, Dr. Bailey Kernia, Dr. Thomas Pisano, Dr. Laura Stein, and Dr. Becky Stetzer. So I will pull down my slides and I will come to the group. Um, so just to start, I would love if I could have you all introduce yourselves to the audience to share a little bit about your journey with disability, or for the faculty, you can feel free to share if you have journey with disability that you would like to share, or your experiences leading up to supporting trainees with disabilities before your particular trainee case. So to start, if it's okay, I'll go first to Tom, Dr. Pisano. Could you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, nice to meet everyone. I'm Tom Pisano. I'm one of the fifth year neurology neurohospitalist fellows here at the University of Pennsylvania. And I have a T4 spinal cord injury, so I'm basically paralyzed from the chest down. I use a manual wheelchair. Y'all can hopefully see the wheelchair there. I broke my back skiing in college. It was during my first semester or my second semester of college, my first year. I was on the ski team. I went off a jump to do a backflip, banged my head hard enough that I don't really remember what happened, but woke up a few days later paralyzed. Um, and wanted to be an engineer before that, and kind of all of those experiences, both during that acute time and then a little bit afterwards, pushed me into medicine. And the spinal cord is neurology, and ended up going into neurology and have stayed at Penn since doing my residency here.
Thanks very much. Dr. Green.
Hi, my name is Emily Green. I am now a faculty member at University of Chicago. I got into disability work because I have ADHD and dyslexia. I actually started medical school late after being a therapist for several years first, mostly because I was not sure if I was qualified enough to do medical school. And so when I did get there and found that there were a lot of difficulties receiving accommodations, especially for STEP, that's when I got heavily involved in helping peers in actually getting the paperwork done and things like that. And so that's kind of what led me to continue to work with docs with disabilities. And so now I continue to do that work at my current institution, continue to help medical students, but also in my own practice, I work with neurodevelopmental disorders mostly. So ADHD, autism, learning difficulties, because yeah, that's my passion and really glad to be here.
Thank you. Dr. Kernia.
Hey everyone, my name is Bailey Kearney. I was born at 28 weeks premature and was subsequently diagnosed with right-sided cerebral palsy that requires use of a motorized wheelchair 100% of the time, and then was also diagnosed in my early 20s with rheumatoid arthritis. So as you can imagine, both of those things kind of complicate medical training a little bit. Throughout my career, I've always gone to somewhat smaller institutions, so I was always kind of the one and only going through at least a physical disability accommodations platform. And so that's really what sparked my interest is I would have given anything to have a panel like this and people to look to for advice. And so that's why I felt very strongly about not only being involved in this project, but projects in my fellowship and moving forward into my career.
Mhm. Thank you. And Dr. Stein.
Hi, everyone. I'm Laura Stein. I am a neurohospitalist and stroke neurologist at the University of Pennsylvania, where I'm also the adult neurology program director. I also identify as a physician with a disability, and I got really interested in disability after I was a patient. I have a incomplete cervical spine lesion from an AVM that ruptured when I was in between my first and second semesters of college, Tom, so a little bit earlier. Um, and went through all of my medical training with a physical disability, and even at larger institutions was often kind of the N of one, and really wanted to someday be in a position where I could hopefully help make the path a little bit easier for trainees. And so since becoming faculty, I was first able to serve as the faculty advisor for our undergraduate disability affinity group. And then now as program director have been trying to institute some GME wide support groups and things like that to try to advance policy and procedures at the GME space.
Thank you. Dr. Stetzer.
Hi, I'm Becky Stetzer. I am up at Albany Medical College in Albany, New York, where clinically I work as a geriatrician. And I also have a hat in the medical school doing clinical competency training, which was a position created here about 5 years ago, primarily focused on remediation. And I was hired with a focus on medical students. And then after I was here for about a year, I got my first resident referral. And after working with a couple of residents, it became really apparent that the folks being referred to me had some disabilities and neurodivergence, so ADHD and autism spectrum were the first, and really kind of opened my eyes to the struggles these individuals were facing. And as I discovered this and started to educate myself, I shared it with our GME council, just with some tips about supporting people from what I've learned, and ways that we might be able to provide them some proactive remediation support, right? Academic support before they're failing. And suddenly I became very busy. So as I started learning about that for myself and with my learners, it's really become really important to me to be able to help people identify for themselves maybe things that are going on that haven't been identified, as well as building programs together with them. So it's been really great to be part of this group.
Thank you all. And to echo something that Dr. Kearney said, just to start, want to express my deep appreciation to all of you because one, it takes time and energy to share your stories. There's already a lot of time that's invested in getting accommodations and getting the access needs that you have taken care of. And you all are doing things to help other people. And so we're just very appreciative to all of you. Um, so my first question for the group, and I'll go in the reverse order. So Dr. Sesser, I'll have you go first, which is, what were the main barriers to access? If you could talk a little bit more about the case that you were involved with, and what strategies helped to address them. So, and
Sure.
sorry,
So
one thing,
the
sorry, can I just say one thing before? And so for the audience, we told the group that they will you'll see them interact with each other and comment on things that other people have said. So we'll sort of try to guide through a set of questions, but the hope is really for this to be a back and forth dialogue that just feels like you're listening to friends talk. So yeah, sorry for interrupting.
Thank you. Yeah, so the case that I published on with my learner, Dr. Shamel, he is a urology resident, and his program had reached out because he was struggling on multiple fronts. And despite remediation efforts for him, largely in terms of knowledge base as well as clinical skills, he wasn't making progress. And they had a lot of concerns about professionalism and relationships with coworkers. So there's a lot going on. And I think that, for him, a lot of those barriers at first was just that there were so many challenges that it was hard to figure out what the core issue was and what was reactive. And so in some of that, I would have to say that the program was fairly open to trying to help in different ways, and they were just very focused on those the specific knowledge, um, being able to express his knowledge and being able to perform in the OR, right? And so some of these other things that were happening in terms of dynamics and professionalism were seen almost as a frustration or an annoyance, right? And so what was great was when I was able to connect with Josh and we sat down, we were able to start sort of pulling apart all of those different threads and seeing what was reactive and what was some of the core issues. And we were able to do this. I was so impressed. He came in with such an openness. I feel like a lot of times the first time I work with a learner, it's hard because you come in to meet with me and we're talking about everything that's difficult in your life, and it's a lot to sort of lay bare. And he came in with an attitude that once he really understood how serious the concerns were, he was all in figuring this out. Um, and so one of the things that I'd hope to sort of emphasize in us publishing this paper is that for one aspect of it is that he did have some traits that I started to think of as neurodivergent traits, right? Some different things that made me wonder, is there something else underlying here that's more than what he's faced? And so we did get him set up for testing, which because he was the first person that I tried to get the school to pay for, there were some delays. So he forged that for us. But the other part was that I didn't need to have a diagnosis to start support. We were able to start talking about what are the barriers, what were the challenges, the professional challenges, interprofessional and the professionalism issues, as well as what were the learning barriers and his performance barriers in the OR. So it was a lot. I think of it sometimes like geriatrics. It's a syndrome, right? There are so many different things contributing, but we were able to really engage in those different things, sort of one at a time, and through longitudinal coaching, work together to try to figure some of that out.
I'm actually going to deviate slightly. Dr. Pisano, since you and Dr. Stein are together, maybe I'll go first to you.
Sure. So when Dr. Stein introduced herself, she said that she hoped to make resident learners' lives better, and I can say that she actually did. So she was my former program director, and so I ended up matching into Penn, and Laura and I met during the interview process. It was during COVID, so we were doing Zoom interviews, and it was quite interesting because both of our disabilities are somewhat visible, and it was like one of the first times where it wasn't, and we ended up bonding over the fact that we both had a spinal cord injury of different reasons. And Laura was really awesome and actually basically went and kind of scouted out all of the hospitals that I would go to for us to try and do a little bit of proactive work towards trying to make my life a little bit easier, since with my disability, a lot of my challenge is actually just getting to the patient's bed. I use a manual wheelchair, but as many of you know probably, being in a hospital, there's a lot of things that make it hard literally to get next to the patient's bed. And so at Penn, we fortunately or unfortunately have the state's oldest hospital. And back in the 1700s, and they weren't really interested in wheelchairs at all. And so there's a lot of lack of accessibility, both in terms of rooms and like the resident call room there is frankly not accessible. I can't even get into the bathroom. I can get my chair through the doorway, but that's it. Can't close the door, can't get to the bed, anything like that. And the neurology building is actually physically separated from to the actual hospital. And so for stroke alerts, we're expected as residents to get to the emergency room within 10 minutes. And typically most residents being in the neurology building go through the basement and get over to the emergency room, but that's not accessible. There's a bunch of stairs. And so I have to go outside to do that. And you can imagine in the Northeast when there's wintertime, it's basically very hard to do. And on top of that, there was a period in time where the hospital basically said per policy, I could not swipe into the emergency room outdoor entrance, and told me that I had to go all the way around the hospital to get in. And it was basically kind of very unnecessary because then I would have to go through old brick roads to get in, but also would have to go through a metal detector and then traverse the hospital on the inside, and it was just not possible. And I am okay with my disability allowing me to sometimes get to the bed differently and do things, but I will never let it compromise patient care. And so escalated this to a bunch of supervisors and finally got it closed. And so that was one of the things that we ended up kind of talking about in our paper, and I can let Dr. Stein chime in here.
Yeah, I think that was I think phenomenal lesson. I think as Tom mentioned, we tried to be very proactive and think about all the physical spaces and think about what accommodations we might need to make to spaces that sort of superficially I knew were not going to be that accessible. And so we tried to be very thoughtful and proactive and do all of these things in advance. And it turns out no matter how much you try to plan, things change. And so that security process changed in the middle of like I think, Tom, your second year of residency without any notice or without even thinking about what that would, potentially do to accessibility of the building. And so I think one of the lessons that I learned was that even if you try to be proactive, there will be things that you didn't think about and that things will continue to change. And so it's important not just to, meet with your learners at the beginning and think about what the expected barriers might be, but to really check in often. Tom didn't tell me about that until he had already solved it himself. And I was like, I would have been ready to go mama bear and go right to the CMO, but he didn't even let me. He just figured it out on his own. But I think, checking in frequently with your learners to make sure that the things that you think you've solved are solved and see what new things have arisen because there's always new things. And then I think, Dr. Stetzer, you brought up one of the other challenges that was pretty significant for us in the beginning was if there's something that we want for our learners, if we know that this is something they need and we want to advocate for it and we think it's a true accessibility need, who pays for it? That was one of the challenges that we faced. We had a few clinical spaces that were just really not accessible. They've been long known to be not the most accessible even to our patient populations, but when we added in provider access to specifically a procedural room, there were multiple things, and we went to the department and then the health system. And it was very challenging trying to figure out who was actually responsible for fixing that, who was going to have the line item in the budget. And those were things that I didn't necessarily expect when we sort of started that process and things that were really challenging to find answers to. Um, yeah, I think those were some of the biggest lessons learned in our experience.
And I'll just say it always makes me think about when you talk about who's paying for it. I know for us, we've worked out that when I want somebody tested, GME will split it with whatever residency program. And then I just think about worrying about that if applicants are making it known that they have this, our program's going to be less likely to want somebody with a disability because of that extra cost, which I understand from a resource standpoint. And of course, we want to have as rich, right? Like for all the reasons I know I don't have to say to this crowd, but we really want to be promoting all of those different people and experiences. So I don't know the answer to navigating that, but that always is like a worry in my mind when we start to bring in these expectations of spending.
And I'll chime in a little bit there too. I'll talk about my own challenges when my time comes, but just talking about like who's going to pay for things. In residency, your time is like limited. So it often takes time to even figure out what you need and then get those approved. And then you find out, okay, it's approved, we're all on board. But then there's another huge delay about who's going to pay for it. And when you have a finite time in training, even a couple of weeks, couple of months can really make the difference in being successful or not successful in that stage of training. And so that was one of the major barriers that myself and my program director came up against several times, actually, at least in the second and third year of residency.
I'd love if you have other things to share. Feel free now to go, Dr. Kearney.
Yeah, I would just say, like, going back to the end of one comment, like, I found medical school to honestly be a little bit easier because, they had the standardized patients in the more open areas, but then when you get to residency, they typically have less well organized or well thought out processes because they have less students coming through by definition. Like it's more weeding out. And so they have not usually done this before. And a lot of what I found is the onus fell on me to kind of advocate for myself, which of course I was used to, but I had never been a pediatric resident, right? I had never been a doctor. I didn't know how to be a doctor at that point. So I was struggling with just trying to meet my daily goals and like all of these things, and also trying to be like, I don't even know what I need. I need you to tell me how to be successful, and then I can help. But then we just kind of ended up in a little bit of a circular pattern. Um, which was interesting to say the least. Um, but I was thankful that my program, I was blessed with two very passionate program directors who helped me from day one. We just were not working with a solid framework, and that led to a lot of unnecessary back and forth. Like one thing I didn't think we would need to define is what is a pediatric resident and what are the job qualifications. So we had to type all that up and get like a almost like a workers' comp assessment, to kind of say like these are the physical requirements, these are the mental requirements, which I was not expecting.
Mhm. Would agree.
Yeah, so my case study revolves around trying to receive documentation for accommodations in fellowship specifically. So what made my situation so unique is that I went back to the same institution that I did medical school for fellowship. And so in medical school, as I said, I was very heavily involved in getting accommodations and in getting things going. And so I felt as though that process was pretty streamlined, and I got what you would call like an ADA verified letter stating like under the ADA, these are Emily's accommodations. And those were quite standard both in medical school and then also when I went to residency at a different institution. But then when I came back, um, there was all of this confusion all of a sudden where it was like, well, you're not really a student, but you're also not really a complete employee. And so I didn't know, but my program director, who was heavily involved, let me know that there was a lot of back and forth about kind of also what Bailey said about, where it was like, well, what are your expectations? And nothing was written up. And then it was like, well, whose responsibility is it to actually coordinate accommodations for you? And then it became, it was not an ADA letter. It was um, I'm so sorry. I'm blanking on the word now, and it's hilarious because I have to keep on saying it. Discretionary. It was discretionary accommodations, meaning that it wasn't under the ADA. It didn't say an official letter. It's like under the ADA, that it just said to the discretion of the supervisor. These are, and so that means that, as a resident, you're going this place, this place. So some person might say, okay, sure, that's fine. And some person might be like, nah, that you're not going to get that. And it's like, but that like my disability doesn't change because I went to a different place. Like that's not how it's supposed to be as well. You have no real safety net if it's discretion, and so that was a huge part of the paper and what we worked on, because it is important. We talk about a lot with like neurodiversity about labels. And as much as I would say I do not like labels, they really seem to put people in a box. The problem is that that's how our system works. So I can't get ABA therapy for a kid unless they have an actual diagnosis of autism. I can't just say that they have social difficulties. I'm not supposed to prescribe stimulant medication for someone who's just having difficulty with focus. They have to have ADHD. And so as much as we don't like the labels, it has to be labeled or else it's not going to be treated. And that's just, we have to work within that. And so when I'm advocating now as a faculty member, I'm really basing it on that whole thing of like, if this person has a diagnosis, then they should have um, secure accommodations. They should not ever be discretionary. And that's a big piece for my paper was just that, it doesn't matter that there are a lot of nice attendings. You never want to come into a space and then find out that this person is not going to accommodate and that there's no paper that you can give them to say, no, this is like legally, like this has to happen. And so that was a big part for me, but I think that yeah, everyone has kind of touched on it where there's just a lot of intricacies that you don't know are going to happen, even if you're going back to the same institution.
Thank you. One of the things that I want to point out is, the group, you all are a group of people who had positive accommodations experiences in the end, and there are so many barriers and so many challenges to get to that point. I guess I would love to hear, this wasn't a question I told you I would ask you before, but how do you all navigate this like burden or tax of, you know, having to push and fight sometimes to get the accommodations that you need while also trying to be a trainee and learn. Um, yeah, how do you all navigate that?
I don't
Okay.
know if I want to. Oh, sorry. You want to go, Bailey?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. I don't know if I want to speak for everyone, but I do think that there is a disability tax, and it comes in different forms for different people. Some of which it's just more time that you need to go and bang your head against a department or something to get the legal piece of paperwork. And sometimes it's just more effort and more energy to physically get to the hospital each day, or you need a break and you need to get out of your chair because your back's really hurting you right now, and you just need to go find 5 minutes where you don't have the same bandwidth that a normal resident has to keep working on their notes or something like that. I think in a perfect world these wouldn't exist, but I think it's kind of just something that we have to live with. And I think that as you know better than I do, the whole point of this series is to try and kind of share some of the learned knowledge to maybe lessen said tax, or at least have a resource to reach out for these kind of things.
Preach. I couldn't have said it better myself. I think I love that term disability tax, right? Like, and I will say, I think my view on it has shifted the further I've gotten into specialized training and like as I go throughout my career. Because as I started medical school and even residency, my disability tax was I know that in my head I was starting behind everyone else. I had to work 10 times harder because for me to round on 15 patients and get up next to the bed and raise my wheelchair and reach all the stuff that was on the wall above my head, I had to be there 20 minutes early. So I showed up at 4 a.m. versus 6 a.m. to my resident counterparts. Did they see that? No. Did they know that it killed my back and all these other things? Also, no. And for a while, I kind of was not bitter about it, but it was just like a chip on my shoulder, right? Like, my colleagues don't know this about me, and I'm working so much harder than they are. But then as I kind of got through that and really focused on, trying to find that work life balance and accepting help and going through the proper channels and finding things that worked, it became like a passion project, right? Because you can definitely find that balance of like we all do this, I assume, because we love it and we don't want to do anything else. And so that means we're going to do whatever we can to keep doing this job. And if that means sometimes putting on the disability tax hat and doing it, that's great. But it's also just like knowing your limits, right? Like I know now as a fellow, like I need to give myself a break. If my back is hurting, I'm going to stop. I'm going to take half a work day from home each week, and that's what I need to keep functioning. And I advocate for myself for those things in fellowship, and I plan to do it moving forward. But I think it's just interesting to see how mind frames have shifted throughout the course of training for me.
I would say that it's it's definitely different. Was definitely different for me, still is, I guess, because it's a learning disability. I think that one of the things that people don't think about is that, there's a lot of camaraderie and um, when you're with your co-residents, it's like, oh my gosh, that was so ridiculous. And I can't believe they made us write all of these stuff. And you don't want to say like that took me twice as long. Like you don't want to admit that it's like that was hard for you. That I cried when I went home. Like that was beyond taxing. That was beyond draining. And I just remember at one point in time, we were griping about consults because it's so hard in psych when it's consults, you have to know the consult. Like, so, you may have to read up on this extremely rare disorder because this person just came out of surgery and is now hallucinating, and you might get grilled on that. And for me, I need a little bit more time. I literally have a reading disorder, and so it does take me a little bit longer. And so, everyone's saying that this was so hard, but it's like, that's actually what pushed me to request accommodations my third year of residency because I just could not keep up with it. I know that everybody was having a hard time, but it's like trying to explain to somebody like, no, my time is even harder. Because there's this thing in medical school and something where it's just like, oh my gosh, I thought that test was so hard and and it's like, no, you don't understand. Like I have failed things. Like this has been difficult. Like this is not a, humble yourself. Like no, like this really is difficult for me. And so it's hard to find, when you're talking about wellness, it's really hard to find another person that you can talk to about the disability tax, where it's just like, not only was that hard, but also on top of that, I had to take even more time to say, hey, this needs to be changed. Like this needs to be accommodated for because it is actually too difficult for me to do. And so there's definitely a tax on all of us, but it is nice to kind of hear about how other people who have physical difficulties, it's just a different kind of tax, but there's a tax with that. And it's really hard for people to understand. And you don't want to have to explain yourself where it's just like, well, why are you so tired? Or why did you take FMLA? And it's like, because this was too much and I had to literally reset and I had to, go through the accommodations process. But I think that's why all of us really wanted to do this today is just to remind everyone, like, it's not just you. It may feel like you're an N of one right now, but like we're all in it together. We just may not all be at the same institution, but it's nice to hear about other people and just that, we are striving. And I think another big reason why we do this is because we want to make sure that those behind us don't. So trying to get those things in place, and that's why the ADA paperwork was so important for me because it was just like no one else should have to go through this. This should just be standardized because there is such a high tax on the wellness part.
Yeah, Emily, when you're talking, I think a lot about the learners that I work with and how we talk about cognitive load. And as I'm hearing everybody here, the extra physical exertion, I think that's going to play in as well. It's all exhausting. And just thinking about one for our individuals on how to manage that extra load, right? And what can we do to help support them? But also, as I'm thinking in terms of developing a culture within our teaching institutions about having some empathy and having expectations that people who are struggling are going to have that extra load. It's not just that it's hard, but it's all that extra work. And to try to just help remind each other as we've got people coming through to be thinking about that and giving that extra pause or, just having that extra time, asking that extra question. Is there something that we could do differently, structure rounds differently, that sort of thing, so that we're trying to come at it from a systematic standpoint as well.
The other thing I was just thinking in listening to some of your responses and then also seeing there's a question in the chat about the approach to work with lifestyle and wellness. I think one of the other things, in addition to the very real disability tax, is I think even just, I remember as a trainee, so much of the wellness events and the community building um, was not very accessible to me. Like my classmates went running on the Schuylkill for fun together, and I was like, I can't run. I can barely walk. Um, they would go out really late and go to the bar, but like if I'm up late, I can't walk. So I think in addition to the day-to-day tax on doing the work, it's also the rest periods and the community building like look and feel different. And, I think that's one of the things that I've struggled with now in this role is, when we plan departmental events, most of my coordinators are not thinking about accessibility and we've had to replan events and sometimes try to push them to think a little bit more out of the box, but it's been very imperfect. And when it comes to the classes, again, some classes are thinking about that more than others, but I think it's an additional piece that we probably don't talk about enough. I mean, it's such a challenge, I think, just to get the day-to-day pieces of the actual training environment. And then when you try to add on building community and, the wellness activities, and those feel like a bigger ask as well, and those feel inaccessible, I think that just adds an extra layer.
I've always said that, and Dr. Kearney, I'll go to you next. I've always said that, docs with disabilities, they're the canaries in the coal mine. And by that I mean that, this disability tax um, uh, helps us to identify the ways in which situations are not accessible. And oftentimes, accessibility doesn't just impact people who have disabilities, it impacts everyone. And yeah. So for me, that was echoing as you all were talking. Go for it, Bailey.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about it before, but honestly, you bring up the wellness. Like, I can't speak for everyone's program, but like for mine, like a lot of their like wellness stuff that they had done for years prior to I got there was like, we're gonna go camping and canoeing and all of these things in the outdoor wilderness is one. I'm an indoor mammal by trade. And two, like I need electricity, right? Like if I don't have it, I go nowhere. And so, and you don't want to be that person to like be what I call the fuddy duddy, right? Like everybody is so excited and you're like, it's not accessible, right? And so I'd be just like, it's fine, it's fine. Well, then I found myself really missing that connection, right? Like I just told everybody it was fine, but really I was then struggling and missing out on community and support. And over time, that did take a toll more so than I recognized. So I think it's important to advocate for yourself because more times than not, if I like once I did speak up, they happily changed things, and my colleagues were more than happy to accommodate that. So I encourage those who have found that to speak up.
I love that. I would say that should, I resonate with that experience that my peers were often my biggest champions in like creating accessible environments. So my last question for you all before we transition to the questions from the audience are what do you hope others learn from reading or hearing about your case? I'll let you go in any order.
I can start. Um, I think one of the things that Laura and I talked about was this idea of trying to find rotation equivalency. So when Laura and I first met, kind of the biggest concern I told her was that I didn't want my training to be less. I wanted to make sure I had every single experience and had kind of all the repetitions that every other resident had. And I really wanted to make sure that like I might have to do something differently, but I want to learn it. And I want to learn it to the same extent that another resident did. And kind of through a little bit of learning from ours, we did try a proactive approach, but I think we learned a few things, which is one, and we write this in our paper, is I think it's useful in the beginning to plan easier rotations because there is a tax on, you're learning now a new position, a new role, you're being now a PGY2, and there's all of the learning that comes from that. And then you layer on all the top things of like, which is the accessible building? How do I get somewhere else? Like, let me do all of that. So having an easier rotation first is kind of helpful because it gives you a little bit of grace and time to kind of make some mistakes. And then to really sit down and think about, Laura had a really good idea, which is there's 3 hospitals and you have to be on nights at all 3 of those hospitals. And one of those hospitals is not accessible. Why do I need to be at that hospital? It makes no sense, right? I'm still going to get the same amount of stroke alerts, same amount of volume, and frankly, probably the other hospitals sometimes were actually even harder. So, that was an easy fix that still, rather than, me saying I didn't want to do nights because of some reason, we just found a accessible room in a different hospital and went from there. And so that kind of idea of giving yourself grace when you start and looking for, equivalent rotations or equivalent experiences, it can be really helpful in kind of planning a residency.
Since Tom was just talking about that, maybe I'll go next. I think one of the things that I'm continuously thinking about is that we all, as physicians, I think, focus on and think creatively about our patients in these scenarios, but don't often afford our colleagues the same creativity, right? I think, in thinking about Tom's schedule, I just kind of took a step back and I was like, well, what's the goal here, right? The goal is for you to practice independent decision making. That's like the goal behind nights is to kind of see those patients on your own, have to learn to triage, have to do some independent decision making with backup. That doesn't need to be tied to any one institution or any one, exact patient population. We need you to see a mix of neurology, right? And I think kind of how can we meet that goal in a non-traditional sense, right? And I think that that is one of the things that I've tried to think about with other learners now who we've had various accommodations for very different disabilities is like, what is the actual educational goal that we're trying to meet here? What is the thing that I need my trainee to take away from, this type of experience during their training? And, how can we modify that to make sure that they're getting the education they need and the experience that they need, even if it doesn't look like the way that it does for other trainees, right? Um, I have other trainees who have needed accommodations from extended shifts or night shifts. Well, it turns out there's a lot of other places that they can get some of that same independent decision making, like weekend day shifts that are also not that appealing to residents and also have more independent decision making and, decreased staffing. And so I think just kind of taking a step back and thinking about what the goals are for your learners, what the goals are for you as a learner, what the goals are as the program director, and what you want to make sure they accomplish by the end of their training. And then kind of try to divorce yourself from the way that we've always done it. You know, how many times have you heard that in medicine? Like, this is what we do, so this is why we, this is what we do. But why? And why do we do it that way? And how can we be more creative? And how can we think about this in the same way that we think about, sleep deprivation for our patients and how their jobs can be modified? Why don't we approach our career paths with the same creativity, and really focus on the goals and not the way that it's always been done?
I can go. I think that for me, the biggest thing was kind of what I've already said, which is just for people to know that, it's worth it. There's a lot of times where I'll see that people are told like, well, it's okay because they'll allow that. They'll allow headphones. They'll allow like the extra time. And it's like, no, you are worth it for them to actually say, we're going to write up what you need. And to remember that it's always easier to take something off than to put it on, especially when it comes to learning disabilities. I want to throw everything at the wall and whatever sticks is what sticks, but I still want to throw everything there. And so people get up, they're like, well, I don't want to ask for too much. What do you need though? Because you're not going to use it every time. And so, it can still be like, I am allowed to take a break. You don't have to say that every 10 minutes the attending has to stop doing surgery. And, we can make this work, but I want them to be honest about what they truly need on their worst day, because that is what I need to have written down, because that's when you need it. And know that it's no one is trying to take anything away. If it was like, well, on Tuesday, Emily didn't use this, like they're not doing that. But it's always good to have it, because at some point in time, if you're going to need that, you want it to be there. You don't want that to be the time when you actually have to use that extra tax and time and do those kind of things. So, advocate for what you truly need and make sure that it's written down.
I don't know how I'm supposed to go after that one. I mean, she just said everything that I was thinking, but I guess along that, like, give yourself grace too. Like, you haven't done this, you haven't been in that position before. So you're also learning and growing and figuring out your needs daily. So don't be afraid to like reassess, re-ask for something, change existing accommodations. Keep that line of communication open, because what was required of me, I thought, as an intern was vastly different than what was required of me as an upper level. And it's still vastly different as a fellow. And so, every new role I have is a new role for me. And I just hope that everybody knows, like, they're not alone, and just echoing that it is so 100% worth it, because the experiences that you go through and like advocating for yourself and figuring out your purpose and your role in all of this, your patients will appreciate, because you're going to find somebody who never thought they'd see themselves in their doctor, and it will change both of you. And I just keep going.
And then what I'll say is actually sort of on a similar vein, but our paper was structured around one of the reasons I feel like the remediation and the accommodations we were able to do was because of this master adaptive learner framework, which, if you're not familiar with, that is this idea that as you're learning, there's a cycle of assessing, adjusting, planning, and learning. And it's kind of like a PDSA type of cycle, but the idea is that it's iterative. Right. And so one of the things that we found, that I found with other learners, is that we come in and we try something, and it might be that it works, or it might be that it doesn't work. But just because it doesn't work doesn't mean nothing's going to work. Right. Or just because it works now doesn't mean it's going to work later. Things keep changing. And so what was successful here is that I had a learner who came in really with that attitude of, okay, let's try this. And this part worked and this part didn't. So let's see what's next. But the program was able to do that as well, right? I might give some suggestions of these might be different ways of approaching teaching, or, some accommodations that we could do. And then they might try it, and maybe it was successful with the learner. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it wasn't successful in the OR, but it was okay in the clinic, right? And so that idea is that it's iterative, and we keep building on it. So I feel like that's important. And then that other thing I said before is just that, you know, at least from where I'm sitting, I don't need a diagnosis to provide support, And I hear what Emily's saying, that you do need a diagnosis for certain things. But when we're in this space, if you've got somebody who maybe is having processing difficulties or attention difficulties, it doesn't mean that we can't create a learner-centered environment that helps to accommodate some of those different needs, even if they don't or haven't gone through the testing to actually have that official ADA diagnosis. There's a lot we can do to be flexible.
Yeah, maybe Emily's more like how the system is, and Becky's more like how the system should be. Uh,
I completely agree with that, 100%. And I really do wish that it was based on that. But yes, unfortunately, there are some sticklers, and it's just, I want you to know that not everybody's going to be as nice as Dr. says. It's
mhm,
just, but I hope that we can strive for that.
mhm. Okay, so we have a bunch of questions. I'm going to try and group some of them together. And the first one maybe is a group of three questions. And essentially, I will boil the question down to um, when you're making the transition from med school to residency, like who should be responsible for accommodations? Should the medical school? Should the residency? Should the trainee? Um, yeah.
I, when I say just for this question, it's hard because that is a lot of work, but we are all adults. And so I would say that for the first part, in terms of like, don't expect someone to know or remember or believe like, oh, they have a disability. Like you do have to speak up when you are transitioning. You have to say like, hey, I'm requesting accommodations for this. I think that we're all hoping that the institutions will be more open to actually having those conversations, figuring out what you need. But I definitely would never want to assume that a place knows about that. I would want to make sure that that is in writing. And what we were hoping to do at certain institutions is that when you apply, that you can, or when you like get well, I guess this is more for medical school, but for residency, it would be nice if maybe you could, have like a link where you could actually request or to say like, do you have any other concerns or questions and put that in there. But if there is no way for you to actually speak up about it, you would want to write an email or a letter or something, because you just never want to assume, especially a new institution is going to know that you need these things, but you definitely want to have it be known as early as possible because it can take a long time to get those things in place.
And I think one of the questions that was in the chat was, do you hear anything from the medical school? No, I mean, we don't get any information as the program director, or I don't think at the GME level, about any accommodations that the learner may have had during medical school. Sometimes my learners will disclose their disability in their application, and then, I often do ask about it during the interview because, I want to make sure that I kind of let my learners know that this is a safe space and program and I will advocate for them. But I do think that it's important to um, make sure that you as the learner not only initiate that conversation, but just let your future program director know. One of the biggest challenges I've had is even after saying, we welcome residents with disabilities, I want to partner with you. I've had trainees who didn't feel comfortable disclosing until they were having academic issues. One of my brightest residents, didn't disclose, a narcolepsy diagnosis because they didn't want to have their schedule changed until, we all started to notice something seemed off after a block of nights. And so I think it's important for both your success and the ability for your program to support you to make sure that you're starting that conversation because we're not going to know unless you let us know.
If I could just chime in, my 2 cents is that um, what Emily is saying, you are not protected if you don't disclose. And so this process of getting the formal accommodations is incredibly protective for you as a trainee. It can often feel the opposite, that like disclosing is a very bad thing and it's going to be held against you. But in my case in residency, I had a lot of sort of complicated drama that happened, and me asking for accommodations at the start of residency and like using my accommodations and all those things was actually very protective for me. And so I really encourage people to, and some institutions have some sort of disability services office or a disability resource professional. other, and ideally the process should be disconnected from your supervisor, the accommodations process. There are some places that I have heard that is not necessarily true. And so there's sort of the ideal and then the reality that can sometimes be different. Um, okay, I have one question. How do you address productivity concerns, such as for people who use screen readers versus someone who doesn't use screen readers, for someone who takes longer to do any task?
I can talk on that because that was a big reason why. So I did not actually ask for accommodations my first and second year of residency because I found ways around it in terms of, I'd have to stay late or I'd have to do certain things in order to kind of make up for it. But at third year is when I kind of just like hit that barrier where I just couldn't, do that anymore. And so it was also about having kind of like a frank discussion of, this is what I know I can do. Can we talk about like the standards of care? Like, are you saying that I have to see at least psychiatry is very different. We see much fewer people. So it's like, do I have to see 8 patients a day? Do I have to see 12 patients a day? Does it have to be a certain number of medication management? Of course, therapy takes longer. And so I think it's important when you have a concern about that to go to your program director and to talk about it, to say like, hey, I'm having some difficulty keeping up. What are some resources I could use, but also you want it to be known that you feel like you're hitting, that cap, and can you discuss it? Because I found out that it was okay for me we did something where for every like intake, so intakes are really difficult for me because there's a lot of reading. There's always going to be these long reports, IEPs, things like that take a really long time to read. And so specifically, I got extra time to review IEPs and intake information beforehand. And that's not a standard accommodation, but it was me having to speak up and say, this is just too much for me to keep up with. It's like, okay, well then I'm only going to have 1 intake a day instead of 3. And to be honest, that's good for any person. But I had to speak up and actually say, I'm concerned about the productivity. Is it okay for me to do this? And actually having a conversation about it.
I would 100% agree. And I think something that helped me was my program and I director said, we're going to meet at every, year change, of course. And then we're also going to meet with every rotation change because sometimes it's the first time you do that rotation, or sometimes it's the first time you do it as an upper level, and we want to see what the expectations are. And so throughout those meetings, I ended up asking for Dragon dictation software, and my note taking, like I then was done before every other resident because one, I'm efficient, but two, just like I didn't realize how much time I was typing one handed. I was like, I know I'm capable of more, and I don't need to stay 3 hours later. And then the other thing was I ended up getting my own CNA to help me with busy rotations like the ED because I didn't realize how much time I was wasting lowering the rails, getting a squirming kid, grabbing the otoscope that was 10 feet off the wall. And so those kind of things really escalated my productivity and would not have happened if we weren't having regularly scheduled like follow-up meetings, which honestly both of us advocated for. Um,
And could a few of you all talk about your experiences of of iterating on your accommodations, either as you went through your training program or even just like on a given rotation and sort of discovered the new accommodation need or a different accommodation need?
Um, I kind of mentioned it already, but the one hospital is basically like I have to be outside whenever it's raining or whenever it's snowing, and so it was just like an oversight on all of our parts that we just didn't think about it for the first time. So, January came rolling around during my PGY2 year, and it's snowing, and like everyone's walking in their boots, and I'm like breaking a sweat, and my chair is completely full of ice because I left 2 hours earlier, and like was panicking that I wasn't going to make it in on time. And, it was for no fault of anyone else, but we just didn't think about it. And so then, like, that was clearly a problem. So, I would let the scheduling team know like ahead of time, like, hey, don't schedule me here. And even like one time where like I was scheduled for like March and I was like, this is like still too close for me. So I ended up just, trading with another resident. So it's kind of one of those, you can't predict everything. And once you learn the problem, you kind of make it aware, and kind of most people are always willing to like help both at the resident level and definitely at the like leadership level.
Maybe we have a time for one last answer if anyone else has a comment.
I was just gonna say that you could always, in the beginning, especially if you have someone who's not really used to accommodations, to say like, "Hey, I know that rotations are going to change and things like that. Could we schedule like every 3 months?" Like, just bring it up. Don't, because they're not always going to bring it up for you. So you may have to say like, "Could we meet at the end of every, or could we meet midway to see how things are going?" You can actually ask for a check-in.
Thanks. I want to thank you all very much. Give you a round of applause. We saw a lot of claps and positivity from the audience as you all were talking. Um, I just want to share once again the Disability Resource Hub. Please, you can either use the link or QR code. You will see these lovely individuals and a few more sharing their stories. And we want to thank you all very much for your attendance. And we have, I believe, one more webinar. I don't have a date on it, but it should be coming soon to you. Thank you all very much. And thanks again to our panelists.
Thank you, Justin.
Of course.
Thanks, Justin.